what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of We Need to Talk. I'm your host, Malynda, and I'm joined by my co-host, Karmel.
Yo, yo, yo.
In studio today, we have no stranger to the We Need to Talk family, my good friend, writer-director, Mr. Dakota Lupo. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for being here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody have a good week?
Yes. Yeah. It was super busy.
Busy, interesting. I feel like there's a weird LA summertime. It's interesting when people say summertime out here, simply because it's like, oh yeah, it is summertime.
Right.
It's an odd season. It's an odd season.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because it just always feels like summer in LA.
Like summertime.
Yeah, I get that. Well, because I live in Toluca Lake, and everyone in these houses by me, like nobody's here because they're all like vacationing and on summer because they can afford to do that. So it's been very empty, but it's been really, really hot.
Yeah. Finally, though.
Like I know, because it was it was definitely a June gloom for sure. But I like it.
And a May gray.
Yeah. And in July, was there something that rhymes with July?
I don't know. I had never heard May Gray before.
May gray, yeah. Well, that's because we just had it this year.
It's a brand new thing for 2019. Well, today our topic is extremely broad, as I was telling the boys earlier, just because there's so much going on. But currently in 2019, we are divided politically, we're divided economically, we're divided culturally. And I have no answers to this question. But how do we fix this divide in this country? How do we fix it?
Wow.
I know. I've thrown a big one at you.
It's a big one. It's a big one.
I mean, I think the answer is that we don't, and that's the biggest challenge that we've been trying to amass this. I mean, if we go back to the Civil War is a good marking point of a division in the country that was pretty. I mean, when you have two sides fighting against each other in a civil war, you can't get much divided than that, right? Yeah. So if you have this moment of tension and this one side versus another side, literally almost like a 50-50 split, then suddenly it just ends. Sentiments don't change. Realities don't change. Education doesn't change. Culture doesn't change. The war changes. And so when you look at moments like we haven't built much from that other than the osmosis of generations going through and fixing things and establishing things. But there's a sense of we're trying to imagine if in the 1860s we were like, well, we're divided. How do we fix that? Well, the way to fix that then was a war. Yeah. And so obviously that didn't work either. Right. So I think the idea of having a divided nation is the most important part of this country. We are the United States, individualized states that are united amongst a banner that can manage all these poles. Right. So I think that the dialogue needs to be less about how do we come together, but how do we be divided and different and understand that people have different realities and find a way to manage differences less than find so much common ground. Because I think we're realizing now that we don't have common ground. Right. No. Future generations may have common ground, but right now we're living with generations that we don't have common ground.
For sure.
And that's something we kind of touched on the last time we had Drexel here, is that the states themselves are actually what our citizenship is to. Not to the America that we believe is this country. We're nationals of a state. And I think if we look at it that way more, like we're Californians and what we do helps us. Like if you look at Europe and America are about the same size generally. Those are countries, and those countries have their own cultures and their own infrastructures. And like if we were like, Spain, I think it would feel a lot different if we took care of ourselves like Spaniards do. And then you have Portugal and you have France, and those countries are like states, and like they're very different.
And America is like the EU.
Right. Exactly. So
Right.
I think you're exactly right. If we approached it from that perspective, not trying not to be divided, but maybe more segmented, more like what we do in California really doesn't affect you in Wyoming. Right. And why are we trying to do one big thing for everybody? Because you don't live like me. You don't talk like me. You don't have any kind of... the only thing that's similar is that we have this one flag that we both like, but honestly, I have nothing in common with someone in Billings, Montana. Yeah.
Right, but I think that there's not a common respect around the country, even with the states. And that's what I also mean when I talk about division, is that we don't respect each other's cultures. We don't respect each other's way of life. We don't respect, how California's acted compared to people in Texas. And that's like, how do you fix that? Even if you are, operating
separately. Because I think part of it is we're forced to be together in a way we're not really used to. And I think like going back to Europe, like you don't really have that issue. Like they love being French, and I'm French and this is my thing. And like, they're not forced to be Europeans, right? But I think we're forced to be Americans. And like my patriotism is nothing like someone in Alabama's.
Right. And patriotism for what? Why? Because you were born here?
Right.
I mean, I think the idea of nationalism, when you go internationally, you look at, if you really look at the cycle of war from like the Industrial Revolution to today, even to the French Revolution and the American Revolution and the American Indian War, and you begin to look at all of these factions of who was on one side, and then it flips, and then it flips, and then it flips. So we're just all different sides that were once another side. So it's not this eternal battle of one idea versus the other. We're just at this period in time. So even beyond just the effect of our borders, there is not much difference between South Texas and North Mexico other than the border that was formed. And so when you begin to establish that over time, well, what's the difference between us and everybody else? There really is none. And I think that's the establishment of if you talk about the global similarity, then you have to find common ground because you are similar. That's a fact that there's common ground, less than like, let's find something that we might have. Like we both watch, Stranger Things. Okay, that's not common ground. Common ground is the value of needing to feed your children. That's common ground.
Just the value of human life in general, I would say. You mentioned the word patriotism, and I feel like that word has kind of changed what it's meant over time. Do you guys agree or disagree?
Yeah, 100%.
I think it has a negative connotation now, honestly.
I think it's been branded and it's been taken with this idea of also American exceptionalism, which abroad is felt by people. And I think that even locally, you say, why is it so important that people's states become so valuable? Not because, like you said, of states' rights. That's an ancient idea at this point. But the idea of being an American doesn't, like you said, patriotism and the being an American have both been changed to the sense that some people may think the fact that I'm American, or even now the word nationalism being, I'll put it in quotes, redefined. Yeah. These are terms that we talked last time about liberalism. What does it mean to be a liberal? Well, it depends who you're asking. Right. Because you could speak of liberalism positively, or you could speak of liberalism and it sounds terrible.
I think a lot of phrases have changed, though. Like for me, when I say I'm a Christian, I have to like immediately defend, like, oh no, I'm not that type of Christian, because there's so many people that have taken words and they identify and they hijack, a phrase or hijack a culture and they turn it into a negative thing, and it's a shame.
Yeah, that's the division right there. They're assuming you need to be divided into a type of Christian as opposed to Christian gray area, right? Seriously, because there is a gray area of all these things that you say, where are you from? I'm from America. And I was talking to someone yesterday about when I traveling in the Middle East, the first question that an Uber or taxi driver will ask me is, Trump? And the yes or no will set the ride. Wow. And so this idea of when an American comes around, you're either a Trump person or you're not a Trump person, because when they see it from afar, it's a 50-50 split-ish. So you're either one or the other. So the idea that there's a gauge of what type of American are you, so I could put you in a box, is just something that we're manufacturing, like all these boxes, all these races, all these states. Pick one and be far from everybody else. Right. And so the rest of the world goes, okay, we'll follow your lead. And it almost like the snowball effect that goes back and forth of us completely separating, and now everyone is so far away from each other that we're lost.
Yeah, I think it'd be so different if you went to Europe or somewhere like, where are you from? I'm a Californian, because then that's a very particular type of person.
Because when I say Los Angeles whenever I've gone abroad, they're like, oh, Hollywood, and that's the thought and the picture that
you say American, it's like I would think the same thing. Trump, apple pie, bully, because
apple pie.
It's apple pie, and that's another thing about like the term American. It's in the idea that we're better than everybody else. Right. It's a westernized white supremacist feeling. Sure, and so like I always cringe when we had to talk with Drexel. I didn't bring it up, but we talk about people serving the military, and we always say to someone who's dressed in uniform, thank you for your service, thank you for protecting us. I always feel like they're not really protecting us from anyone. We're the problem. We're the one going around swinging the guns and the bats and beating up people. No one's affecting me. I don't feel threatened by any country. Yeah. And I get we have this terrorist narrative that's going on. I've never been terrorized by a Middle Eastern person, so I don't get that. But I know we're out doing some stuff.
It's relative, yeah. It's extremely relative, and that's when you especially in the Middle East, you have a generation of children who are now in their 20s that grew up during the Iraq War, and what did they know other than they were in a rural town and there was a faction that was causing more harm to them than not. My relation with a lot of Syrians I work with in a lot of projects is that they understand Russia's role in the Syrian conflict. And they really do know the difference between a Russian plane and a Syrian plane and an American plane and a British plane, so that for them, from the aircraft, they get an emotional connection to the validity or the irreverence of a bomb coming down. So right away, there's an emotional context based upon a passport. essentially.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've created for ourselves, which can be, like you said, you go somewhere else, you say California, you say Hollywood, that's something. But if you go to Trump country in rural America, that's going to be taken much differently, as it should, because there's a vestige of that is not in line with their values are.
Absolutely. When it comes to the racial divide in this country, a lot of people have said, we weren't divided until Obama became president. And of course, a lot of people, I know, of course, a lot of people now are saying the country is more divided because of Trump's rhetoric. What are your thoughts on that? Because personally, I think that, yes, I do think that the country became more divided when Obama became president, simply because people had to come face to face with the fact that they truly did have a problem with having an African-American president. And I think racism just came to the surface. Yeah. And before, it was just very hidden and very swept under the rug, but they had to come face to face with the fact that they had a problem with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I do agree that the sense of it being defined has changed, but if you listen to the Nixon tapes, that administration was pretty racist as well.
Sure,
so you begin to go through history and time and moments when even the 1950s, when this American home and the apple pie and the white picket fence, even though that was extremely a white suburban ideal, but it became this color of America and this like top layer of this is what America's like, and that. Like, you can't... what was the film? Suburban, the one with George Clooney and Matt Damon. George Clooney directed. I think Suburbicon or something like that. But it essentially plays the racial divide in suburban America, where where the main character, who's a white male father, goes on this killing raid, and there's this black family who's just trying to be respected in town, and they're getting all the heat. Meanwhile, he's able to do all these things with no problems. And it's a great film that kind of shows this polarity and balance, but those black families being positive and very influential parts of the community didn't exist. So there was no sense of having to face that sense of racism. Right. But when there's a black president, then there has to be a decision to be made by the people. So I don't think it got more divided. I think it got more defined. But we are I think we've kept a good consistency of racism throughout our history.
Since 2008, right?
Yeah, since 8.
Yeah. 8. Yeah. I'm like, what do you mean more divided? It's like, what? To me, I've always been like, what's really changed? There's some things that have made things a bit easier for us to get around and do things, but it's been 54 years. Yeah. Since, it's not new. And again, it's just shifting. There's still things that are still in place today in our Constitution and our laws that still negate black people in ways that doesn't affect white people. So it's just funny to me. I wonder what would happen, and when it does happen, when we have a female president. All of a sudden, all these misogynistic men are just going to pop. They have always been there. Right. They're there now, but now those things are to come to the surface. So it's just things that are now coming up. We're seeing these things now, and now you have to deal with it. I'd rather see it. I'd rather see it. Know, because I don't want anyone to be fake around me.
They say the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. 100%.
But it's also poor journalism, I think, is part of the issue. I think the question of, with Pete Buttigieg, and they ask, you think America's ready for a gay president? And I think that's one of the dumbest questions I've ever heard, because it's not like America is first of all, America doesn't have a one answer. And anyone says that, is America ready means do all these people who have different opinions ready for this one particular opinion, which is a silly question to ask. Right. But the idea of asking if we're ready for a female president or an LGBTQ president, it doesn't say anything, because there's no readiness. That's not even a question. That's to say, are there bigots that will finally find a way to open up and say, I'll accept this as my president? That's what you're asking. Are the most bigoted people going to be okay with it? The country's ready for a president because we have a constitution. And we set up an established way to find a president. We're ready for a president. It doesn't matter who it is. So I think that's part of the narrative being created by this specializing journalism, so we can have a dialogue. Are we ready for a gay president?
Exactly.
Right. But I think also in what you say, when you say the are you ready, it's like when you think about the Bible Belt, for example, they think the president represents their country. And to them, they're like, a gay person shouldn't represent our country because being gay is wrong in our eyes and we're a Christian nation, quote unquote. Right. So that's why I think they ask, are they ready? Because they aren't ready.
Well, they aren't. And I think we'll go back to the beginning of the division in the country. There's a lot of, I think, both Iran and Saudi Arabia with a pseudo-Sharia law in there, the way they run their country. And it's so, it seems like this archaic, ancient idea of having religion be the basis of your country. Meanwhile, the people who are subjugating that are the ones that have very much a religious-based idea on their government here in the States. So if you look at that and you say, well, if we give a country like Saudi Arabia, which human rights violations aside, which is a terrible thing to say, but human rights violations aside, as a sovereign nation, they have the right to govern the way they wish to govern. So then it comes to say, what about our religious nation? What about our a-religious nation? The fact that as an atheist, I don't feel represented at all.
Right.
At all.
Right.
And that's something that is, I'm okay about it because you shouldn't only feel represented by someone who agrees or understands your way, but it's this sense of, well, if there is different factions here, why don't we all get representation that is equal? Which goes to the idea of this country. But all of a sudden, it's not about equal representation. It's about, I want my representation to be the overall. So if we have a president who doesn't line up with your religious values, that's okay, because in your lifetime, you may have a few that will.
Right, right, for sure.
Yeah, that's why I keep going back to, our states. Like if I look at our governor of each state, that probably represents a better, gives you a better image of the people of that state. Like that makes way more sense. I mean, not that Arnold ever represented me, but like it's closer than looking at our president.
Right.
So I mean, that I will keep going back to that. Like if we became more state, and I always say that, and get back to like voting, I always push for voting local, voting for your state, because that actually makes a difference. That those are things we can actually have tangible results for.
Affect you.
And affect you,
Absolutely.
right. Yeah, the stuff in the federal, and that's a whole nother animal. We can share it another time. But like that's the thing I think really helps me understand what's going on here, is who's leading us here. I never get into the debates about the president. To me it's a show. It's drama. So you talk about the stories and the journalism. If someone's asking if we're ready for we're not then, because you wouldn't ask that question, right?
Right.
No one's are we ready for a white president? Of course. I mean, we've had that.
That's all we've known.
It's all we've known. So you're asking the question because we're not, and this is going to drive ratings. It's going to create a buzz, and you get to talk about this. And you would love a gay president because then you have something to talk about. But yeah, I mean, there's other countries who've gone through these, and it's here today, gone tomorrow. It's way past that. So we are a bit archaic in a lot of ways, where we look at other countries and think they're not progressive. They're like, they're way ahead of us in certain things that we are way behind in. So, and the whole thing about other religions running countries and that, I mean, we've always had this part of our country. So I don't get why we look at it and think, again, we're better than someone else because we're doing the same thing, if not worse, in a lot of ways.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, even talk about, when Barack Obama was elected, he went right into the financial crisis. That was his first action of the first year of his presidency, was dug into that crisis. And people weren't talking about, like, even though this incredibly, possibly damning financial crisis is happening, are we ready for this black president? Like, by the time he got elected, people stopped asking the question because there was stuff to do. Yeah. So I think that's also part of it, that this big, grandiose conversation doesn't really happen afterwards. That 2 years into a Buttigieg's term, we're going, so how is it with the gay president? Like, it's not. And if that was actually going to continue, then I say let's have the pre-conversation. But if we make it matter, then it matters. If we don't make it matter, then it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
But that's when, like, all logic just goes out the door when you're just focused on those little things. It's like, is their policy good? Are they running the country? Is the economy in a good place? It's like, well, they're gay. It's like, but what does that have to do with anything? But there are people that think that way.
And I think this is part of the challenge, which I'm glad that we were enough into this presidential cycle that these Democrats are actually being focused on for their policies, where Kamala Harris isn't always getting. Is she getting enough of Biden's black voters? Like that. Right. That is a silly. Like you shouldn't need somebody to be the race or the gender or the sex of the thing you need to have policy go by. Like the best candidate for black voters is the ones who have things that help black citizens and policies that change people and other minorities and other races and everybody. So it becomes less about, like you said, there's systematic issues that are oppressing races in this country. If there's a focus on that by somebody with Swedish origin and they're stark white, does it matter who that is literally, we talk about the occupant of the office. They should be a shell of a body. Right. They should be someone who has the moral leadership and the authority to be able to point and direct and to guide and to lead. Yep. That's about it. We have 435 senators, representatives and 100 senators to take care of that for us. Yeah. So that's where the representation comes in. Right.
Do you think that we have good enough candidates? Or do you think the problem is that we don't?
I know. I think we totally do. I feel like somebody asked me, who are you voting for? And I said, that is like going into a restaurant and like they give you a menu and they're like, hey, we're not even open yet. And then you being like, I'm going to order this. And it's like, well, we're not going to open for another 2 hours and we have no ingredients yet. And here's the few things that we have. And it's like, but I'm going to order this. It's the silliest idea. Read the menu. See what they have. See what's good. See what's in season.
Ask
then
the
you
waiter what
ask the waiter what. I mean, so it's the idea. I think people want to play the game, but we have incredible candidates. I mean, I think that's the part of the problem here is that there's this who can beat Trump. I mean, this cup of coffee on the ballot can get 20% of the vote at least. I swear to God. I mean, that's
probably would,
and maybe even more. So I think the idea of who can beat Trump. I mean, if Pete Buttigieg or Jay Inslee or Kamala Harris or Andrew Yang can't beat Trump, then that's the answer. Then we're a country who elects. I think there's this idea of we have to beat Trump. No, the election, the presidential election, is a representation of our country. So we all voted for Trump, whether you voted for him or not. We all did something in this country that led to that. So that's going to happen the next time.
Right.
And so if the candidate doesn't win, then they're not good enough.
Right.
So if you're worried about, well, Elizabeth Warren is pulling Bernie voters and Bernie's pulling Joe Biden voters, if one of those three can't beat Donald Trump, then we're in a bigger mess than we think.
Yeah.
Because they're incredible statesmen and women. And they've done some things in their past that are questionable, and they have questionable ideas. But if you put one of those three to at least get things done, I mean, comparatively, this cup of coffee would be exciting as well. So it's
and that's what I mentioned the last time we talked with Drexel, is like, if I just take this person versus Trump just purely on their political aptitude, they all win.
Like, of course.
Because they
Marianne
have
Williamson,
political aptitude. I mean,
right, exactly.
He was a reality TV star. I think that people are forgetting that.
Yeah.
He had no business running for president. He's no business being president, but that's another conversation.
Yeah. But when you get into, like, I was listening today on Fareed Zakaria was interviewing the foreign minister of Iran, and Fareed was asking him some questions about what he thinks. Because the foreign minister said that we're not going to get out of this issue with Iran right now until Trump the U.S. has to get something. And we know that the U.S. has to get something out of this. And he's asking, what do you think he wants? And I don't think he wants anything.
Right.
He hasn't any idea what's going. I mean, there's no concept. Cause you hear, what does he say? We got some good people on it, and I'm talking to a lot of people, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And he just uses the same phrasing. He doesn't,
all the time, for every situation.
Every single advisor has said the same thing, that he is unattentive, he doesn't read, he doesn't understand anything. So for these... That's
why he's not aging.
Well, yeah,
that's why he's not aging.
Well, he has that idea that he has, his theory of working out, that he feels that working out is useless because you have an indefinite amount of energy. And so why would you go running? Because you're wasting your energy. So for him, he conserves his life energy. That's his idea of exercise. Okay. So that person is making decisions about, hijacked tankers in the Strait of Hormuz and, nuclear proliferation. So we're in good shape.
Man.
Yeah, see, that's the stuff I get to. I'm like, I could watch House of Cards and it would be the same thing to me. It's just as real life as this. There's nothing about Trump to me that I feel like I need to invest any time other than talking to you guys about it. Because he has no clue what he's doing.
Well, here's what's leading him, and I think the important thing, that what might save us all is the fracturing of the Republican and Democratic Party. Like those parties, I think, both will and need to fracture. The Democratic Party, I think, is showing why, and I think they could fracture positively. I think the Republican Party may fracture negatively by the way of people realizing that, like, it's either morals or policy. It's either conservative justices or your soul, which is Mitch McConnell's play. And I understand that he's become the pariah of the entire country, one of them. But he's also on a mission to get conservative justices, and he has been doing that for his entire career, and he's got that. So if he shuts his mouth and stays a target, then he's just going to kind of hang around until he's done. And when he leaves, even if he gets elected out in 2020, he's going to still be here for a long time. And his thumbprint's going to be here. So I think once the Republican Party realizes it has to break apart, when the Democratic Party finally realizes that it has to break apart, then suddenly, political parties are like races. And I think over time we have, races have broken up.
Right.
And Anthony Bourdain had a great quote, and I'll use the kind version, but racism, we're kind of going to screw our way out. Eventually, we'll all just have babies with each other, and eventually everyone will be like a common brown.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, then we live amongst a place without race. And what is race? Socioeconomic representation. And so we'll have the same issues, but we'll actually be able to see them then. So I think part of that is the parties breaking down, so we can actually see the policy less than what the Republican Democratic ideals. Because if I were to ask you the same thing, it's the same thing you said, Karmel, about being from California. Well, are you from Fresno or are you from Los Angeles? Are you from Bakersfield or are you from San Fran? Big difference.
So different.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to see the parties broken up, and because I've always said this.
Say that, yeah,
because it's such a big deal. Like we have two parties. Like I didn't even vote for that, so I don't have a reason to even get into this thing because I don't like the whole setup. Yeah. Like if we had four parties, I could now I could see some kind of differentiation with this one and that one. Because to me, they're both a bunch of rich dudes who are just getting richer. And every time I ask, what's a policy that's solely helped people? didn't have any corporate kickbacks, no lobbying from anybody, just people. Never get an answer. There's been plenty that have been just corporately funded agendas and laws. Tons of them. That, to me, already says something's wrong. A lot of that has to do with these parties. These guys have their own agendas. They have, keep agenda again.
Yeah.
They have things that they're looking for because it's not really about me. It's not about the people. It's about them getting what they can and using me as some kind of reason or excuse to go and do this and we're doing this for the people and I'm no, you're not.
It's gang mentality. It's gang mentality. It's literally Grease, like the with the little jackets. Because like if you're part of the pink ladies, you can't be an individual. You have to represent the pink ladies, and what that ends up being is who's the popular kid, who's getting the most follow. I mean, AOC, it has done her thing since the beginning. Yeah, and objectively speaking, she's been a pretty strong representative. But aside from that, she represents something that is different than the party, and that should be celebrated, not denounced. Yeah. And there's a guise to all of that begins to go, well, she's popular now, and so all the presidential candidates are vying for this idea of internet media popularity, which in the currency of voters has never proven to be true anyway. There's no Instagram or social media or, if we knew polling and we knew data, then Trump wouldn't have been such a surprise as president. Right. So we all had to go back and go, well, who are we still following? But you get the parties that are trying to sweep toward this. Let me pull the young voters. Well, all I have to do is sidle up to AOC. Well, that's not a policy. And then all of a sudden you have, as great as she is, a freshman congresswoman that is leading part of the party, which of all of the representatives should be more than one person, should be more than 4 people. Right. So it brings this sense of who's the popular kid, how do we really get on their side, and how do we make the team cool, less than what Bernie Sanders, I think one thing he gets, like it's lost with him is that if you ask him a question about anything, he puts his blinders on and he goes straight through policy, numbers, history, and he just goes. And I think that's what's needed is more. Let's discuss what we're doing. If it fits into a party, great. I mean, he's an independent running for the Democratic Party. He didn't switch his party. He is an independent running for the Democratic Party, which is how it should work. Yeah.
And that's funny because again, we talk with Drexel. I hate the fact that it's got to be who's popular, who speaks well. Because like if you look at Bernie. Yeah, he just mows it down. And he's so good at that almost got him elected. But if, he didn't because he's old, and he's
Trump got elected.
Because he's popular.
He was more racist than he was old. He was more bigoted than he was old. Yeah.
That's so ridiculous. So that is so ridiculous. That's what it took.
I mean, it's an abuse. If you think about or know anyone that's ever been in an abusive relationship, whether it be physical abuse or mental abuse or even self-abuse with any sort of issues, there is an abuse culture with Trump and his base, but also Trump and America that we've come into, that there's a, walk out the door. Just walk out the door and start over. That's a hard thing to do as someone who's in a relationship that's abusive. And so you think about people that are Trump voters, they have to face their community as to be anti-Trump when you're in the Trump community. That's sacrilegious.
Right. But also the people that you can clearly see that they know Trump is a joke. He's getting out of hand, the things that he says on Twitter, but they're still blindly supporting him because they almost feel like, I can't admit that I was wrong. Right.
Well, it's just, it's like being in a relationship. It's like, it's kind of Stockholmish. We're like, well, they make excuses for him. Like, they say the one that kills me is, I like that he just says how it is. He's just keeping it real. I'm like, what? Yeah. That's the stupidest thing ever. Real racist and real wrong. I'm like, that's not okay. I don't care how truthful you're being. Your truth is wrong. And truths aren't, and I always say this, truths aren't facts. Truths change. There's some things we generally consider true, but they're not necessarily facts. And he just will spit out his truths and we take them as facts. I'm like, that's not a fact. That's something we all consider true because he's saying it. You guys follow it. He's the president. Okay.
But it's both sides too. And I think that's recently with his tweets, especially this week with the go back to where you came from tweets.
With the squad,
with the squad, which I don't like calling them squad because I feel like it brands them as like a.
It does.
But
that's what they call themselves.
They call themselves.
So we're gonna say it for now.
They did it themselves. So
and if you don't know who the squad is, it is AOC, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar,
who have been doing work that I think that. It's unfortunate that in 2019 it took that much time for there to really be, and there's always been representatives that have broken through, but the fact that the 4 that are really breaking through are freshmen just goes to show how much complacency there is amongst the rest of the House to realize that wait a second, they are taking the momentum from their election and they're making it actual continuing momentum throughout their job, and that's something that when people talk about fighting for, like, they won't vote for something, or they will do a no vote because they don't want to be on the record having voted for something that will change whether or not they get elected. That concept, the fact that we just let that go, that people are fighting for seats, for what? Like, you serve and then you end up leaving.
Yeah.
Whether or not your constituents say that's accurate. And so finally, gerrymandering becomes an issue. And finally, identity politics in an actual infrastructural sense makes a difference. But the fact that we're kind of still just sitting back and well, they're not voting for that. Like, they're not saying this because they want the Trump contingency to help get them reelected. Well, why do we want them reelected?
Right.
You should prove your worth. And the idea of that is so antiquated that no one's really proving their worth except for these freshman congresswomen.
Right. Absolutely. I completely agree. But I want to talk a little bit about his tweets and the situation that happened last week. And if you aren't privy to what happened, he basically tweeted, that these 4 women, since they have such vocal criticism towards how he's running the country, they should go back to where they came from, quote unquote, fix that country, fix their government, and then come back and show them how it's done. Granted, 3 of them were born here and are from here, and Ilhan Omar became a citizen 6 years before his wife even did. So this kind of spiraled into a lot of people agreeing with him. I was very shocked with how many people agreed with what he said. And then at a Trump rally, there became even this chant of "send her back," referencing Ilhan Omar. And what has been so problematic for me over the last few years, which is like, why is his first term still not done yet?
It's been a long term.
It's been a long term. Is that he's just been allowing people to be like, it's okay for me to say this. It's okay for me to talk like this. It's okay for me to feel this way because the president says it, so it has to be okay.
Yeah.
And it's so problematic.
But I don't think that it didn't exist beforehand. It was not incited. And I think that the biggest challenge now, we were talking about this earlier, Malynda, is the idea that those tweets set off the Democratic Party and the left in a defense, explanation, racism tour of explaining this. And I understand that there's a challenge we're stuck in of this, the weight of the circumstance and the weight of what he said. And like you said, the fact that people blindly agree, it's not that they agree, the education system in our own country and our education about our own country is so limited that there's no context to look at this man and say, wait a second, this doesn't fall in line with what I know to be what this country is built upon.
Right.
It's not. So they just go, well, I guess all I have to do is agree with him and I get to feel like I'm contributing. Cool, easy. And he's inciting something that's inside of me that I'm a little upset about or that I've been born to be upset about. And so when you begin to have the left begin to defend something that should just be seen as racist, he's racist, here's an issue that we have to deal with, and let's work on tackling the issue, less than the news media of the past week has been this, he said something racist.
It's like, why are you shocked?
Again.
Right.
Like why? Like, and the shock culture of this, we have to fight him. People have to get over it. He is the president. This is the country we live in. People say, go back to your country. Clerks tell people who come in their store to go back to that. That is the country. That's a fact. And I think putting the emotions aside, which is very hard to do, but looking at it as a problem we have to tackle, is a lot different than discussing how we feel about it emotionally so much, because it's gotten to the point where all he has to do is to send that tweet out, and he knows it. He's intelligent. He sends that tweet out, and suddenly we're having a discussion on what's racist and what's not racist, as opposed to focusing on how do we change systematic racism. It is a fact. What he said was a racial statement.
Yes.
And he is a racially charged human being. And he is also a racist.
Right.
So let's talk about tackling that less than discussing the kind of racism and how it affects it. We know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You made a good point about, our education. I think this also goes to how we're training people in the toxic patriotism that we talked a little bit about. If I agree with the president, I'm kind of right. I feel good about what I'm saying. Yeah, that's true. Go back to where you came from. But I've always felt like people are not understanding that how this country was created was by people who were not from here. So there are people who, like, my family is native, like, we're from here, like, not even like brought on a slave ship, like, from here. Like, so I can't even fathom being told go back to Africa even. Like, that stuff, it gets me so pissed off because I'm like,
We're all from Africa.
Right. Yeah, if you want to go that way, the very beginning, right? But like the folks who created this country are not from here. Right. So I don't understand when people just chant that, not understanding. Did you go to school at all? Do you remember those ships that came across from Britain to over here, like you're not from here yourself.
You have textbooks in Texas changing the actual narrative of what slavery is. They don't know that.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you saw that story with Texas changing.
Yeah, but I do feel like, I mean, I grew up in a pretty liberal part of New York. You know, I'm 30 minutes from the center of Manhattan, so you would assume that the education system there would highlight what slavery really was, and we did, and we spoke about it, we learned about it, but to the gravity of what I learned as an adult is absolutely, there's no education even in places that do accept and allow it.
Right.
That we did a lot on immigrants from the 1920s, because the white population was Italian and Irish, so there was a history of that for sure. But, you know, so you get, you know, there is still this selective education, but at no means do we understand slavery as an economic issue. Like, that's something that came up later. To discuss slavery from the economic perspective gives new context and new color. Discussing it from an interracial children perspective of not only slave owners and slaves, but just interracial marriages of that era are just so, to begin to guide the beginnings of multiracial people in this country is new context. And you get to learn as opposed to have to say something about it, which is something that we're not used to anymore. We're so used to commenting and not just like sitting there reading something and digesting it and then going to bed. Like that's how you learn something.
Because again, that goes to truths versus facts. We're taught so many truths that we generally consider to be true, but the actual facts we're not told.
Sure.
I mean, it's some of this are so far from the truths we're taught. Like when someone hears it, they're like, there's no way. There's this cognitive dissonance that takes place. You're like, I've known this since second grade, and now you're going to tell me that's not true now? So then I hear something from this dude who looks like me, and he says stuff that I kind of like. Hey, it feels kind of wrong, but I'm going to go along with it. Because at least if I go along with it around my folks and my people who all agree to the same things that we think are true, I feel okay.
But it's also the same thing, like if you're in a group of friends or you're at a barbecue or you're at a bar with people and somebody makes a comment that's unsavory amidst a group of friends in an environment that's casual and everyone kind of lets it go. Not saying you have to be there and say, like, all right, turn the music down. We have to talk about this statement you made, which is like, what are the roots of this comment? But there is still a sense of people don't want to be the person to have to be the authoritative adult in a group of friends.
Well, because then you become the problem.
You become, and I think even people don't have the literacy to know how to have those conversations. They don't know how to be empathetic. They don't know how to be pragmatic. They don't know how to speak about the history of our country because they don't know it. And there's such an issue of, well, why is racism and why is it important that we discuss this? Some people might not know how to answer that. Why is it important that, there's almost like a justification turn at this point with Trump that's becoming, wait a second, they should go back to their country. Because like you said, truth and fact, they're getting things, they're taking as fact as these diseased rapist migrants are flooding our border. We have a crisis at the border. And that becomes fact. And then the second thing becomes fact, and the third thing becomes fact, and then someone who is from, let's say, Los Angeles gets in a dialogue with someone who's been being fed all these, in quotes, facts. And I think the issue is that we don't offer them the understanding to realize that this is what they know, this is what they understand, this lines up with the values of the people in their circles. So there's no sense of trying to access the issue. There's only a chance to say, you're wrong, here's why, as if people are going to go, I didn't even see that.
But I think the problem is with those people is that nobody's ever taken the time to actually read and learn on their own. They're like, that's the president. He's the leader of this country. This is what he's saying, so I'm just going to believe it. So us, obviously, being more on the liberal side and actually doing the research and doing, trying to have these conversations, we become the problem. Like, well, you're wrong. No, the president said this. And I just find it so interesting. Like, why do you think that this man is telling you the truth? Why do you think that he represents you? Why do you believe everything that he's saying?
I mean, that's our country and our culture. Like my mom, oftentimes will say something to me about, did you see this on TV? Did you read this? Did you see that? And I'm like, yeah, I saw it. Well, what do you think about it? I don't care. I feel bad about something. Mom doesn't really affect me. Well, you should. And she gets all heated about it. I'm like, you saw it on the news. I'm like, it's TV, it's media, man. It's not actual life. When you go out, you feel the things that they're talking about. And she'll be like, oh no. I'm like, well, that's it. What are you actually experiencing when you walk outside? Like so many times, even my daughter gave me this joke she wanted me to do on stage about Mexicans taking our jobs. She goes, Dad, I've never had a Mexican walk up to me and take the vacuum cleaner. And I started dying. I'm like, that's funny. That's hilarious. I've never had that either. And I'm like, I don't see Mexicans running in taking coding jobs at this tech industry. They're coming in getting what they can, and they work their butts off. And if they did,
what does that say about you?
Exactly.
You know,
you could have got the same job,
right?
But they're probably working two of these jobs that you could have done.
But then you go beyond that and you say, because it's funny, I very rarely engage on social media with dialogue, but there was some.
I
was
wish
a
I
comment
were like that.
Yeah, I know you are a pro, Malynda. There was somebody who mentioned in a comment about the send or back chance, talking about how but saying white privilege is not racist, right? And I think the idea of, and in my response to him, it was about white privilege is not an opinion. White privilege is a statistical fact that if you look backwards and you say, if you obviously. You know, because his whole thing was I worked my ass off, my blood, sweat, and tears, and I think that's the biggest defense for people to say white privilege is something that is racist against white people, and that's a call for a lot of Trump voters and people in that mentality. And I think the understanding is to give them the currency to feel not privileged, and I think they don't understand their privilege, and I think that's something that's important to have the dialogue. And we got to a nice common ground of explaining. You have statistically. In the past, getting a job, getting pulled over, going on a date, all these different things. Depending on your color, you have certain advantages that you might not have otherwise. And you're blind to most of those advantages until you actually experience them. And so a statistical fact of white privilege is a lot different than me saying, you're white, you're privileged. Because there's a lot of white people in this country who are feeling very unprivileged.
Sure.
Who are feeling in the dump. And as they should, because again, race is not color, race is economics. The color is just the easier layer on top that you could point to somebody out. Right. But you go to places in the world who have one singular race, it's tribal. Or it's economics, or it's something else. But it all goes back to, when I was in Kenya shooting, there was the biggest difference between tribes were if they had livestock, then they were trading more outside of their villages, which means they had more open ideas to advancing their own communities. Those who didn't have livestock weren't trading, they were self-sustained, and they had more cultural traditional ideas, like FGM, like things that were already abolished elsewhere in the country. So you begin to see how community and communication changes that based upon whether or not I have a pig which can offer me finances outside of my community. So those little things is what brings it back to what you said, Karmel, and suddenly people are saying, well, I'm not going to take the vacuum cleaner. Well, if that vacuum cleaner was $15 an hour, then you might hold on to that vacuum cleaner even more. And things change. And so when someone's taking that vacuum cleaner for $5 an hour or $4 or $2 an hour off the books just because they can get a job, well, that's part of the economy which unfortunately exists that we need to supply. I mean, if we deported everyone that was an illegal, I say illegal, it was not a documented Californian in California, our restaurant industry and our farming industry in the whole country would collapse.
Right.
So they're not taking oftentimes jobs of somebody who is a U.S. citizen. They're often taking jobs of someone who came before them that is just like them.
Why do you think people don't see the connection between socioeconomics and race?
Because they can't pronounce socio-economics.
Serious. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Seriously,
Seriously.
Polysyllabic words are not.
Well,
happening.
Because I think you're born with Black, white, Hispanic, Asian. You're born with these ideas that are easy. Like I can touch my white skin and I can touch black skin. I can touch it, but I can't really touch social and socioeconomic injustice. I can't touch Section 8 housing and racial biases in a very, if we all applied for an apartment and I got it because I was white and you guys were not white, that's something that as a landlord, you can go through every legal guideline through and I could get that apartment just because I got the apartment. But I could also get it because he was being racially biased. Either way, the system is set up that you can have racial bias in those spaces. And so racism is not one or the other. Racism can be injected without there actually being structural change.
And I think that nails it, because I was just talking to some friends of mine yesterday about a lot of us who grew up in Compton and Linwood, and how Compton at one time was a very white town, and how through
what years do you know?
I think it was like in the 40s to like the 70s, and then blacks started to move in, and the housing that they could get versus the housing that they wanted, the loans they could get, the loans they couldn't get, and how if you look at, I think around the Compton airport, those are certain housing that their parents got that was super cheap, not the best area, because who wants to be around an airport? But they hold on to it because that's all I could get. And so it's like, as a white person, your family didn't have to go through that. They could literally pick up and go anywhere. And not understanding that this section of White Compton is so black now is because they were forced into that area. They couldn't just go up into any town and, I want to get this house and go to the bank and, hey, Bank of America, give me a loan. No. As you said, you could walk in and apply for an apartment, and someone could just look at you because you're white and say, I'll give it to him. And people don't understand that because that's something you can't see. You don't get to see the loan application. You don't get to see the guy deny or approve. You don't see that. You just see black, white, Asian. So that's 100% it.
Yeah. So I was speaking to somebody who works for a very wealthy individual, and this wealthy individual was discussing, might have been an area up in Northern California, and she said, it hasn't gentrified yet, but it's on its way, in like a positive way. And she's a billionaire, right? And so her perspective, and she was angry about it, and I said, you have to understand her perspective, that for her, the word gentrification, and the conversation was about how she does not understand the word gentrification. But I said she does for her. For her, gentrified means this area, which was an area I didn't go to, is now being reinvested to an area that I can go to and bring my children. So for her, she doesn't understand the word because she understands what it means and what it says and what it does, but the context of it is different because when you don't perceive it as it's a benefit for yourself, but you don't see how it damages other people, then for her, that word means something. So we begin to go with these contexts and these words where we hold on to gentrification as a really heavy issue that's deeply rooted in how this country is formed racially. And for somebody else, gentrification means it's almost ready for a Whole Foods. And exactly. So, and I think and to go back to your question, Malynda, I don't think people realize that. I don't think people realize, what it means to be base level, to be fair, to be fed. We are a country that does not have social ideals, but we have social programs, and I think that needs to change. You go to Europe, people really understand that food and education and a place to live
and healthcare
makes cities and countries prosper. And
watching Michael Moore's Where Do We Invade Next? Have you seen that? Man. Oh my God, you got to watch it because it hits exactly like that. Like he was at this hotel, and he saw, I guess, down from his hotel this restaurant serving like the kitchen had some like cheese and some stuff, and he's like, I want to go there tomorrow. He goes down, walks around the corner, and it turns out it's a school. And he's like, oh man, this must be a super high end school. He goes in the cafeteria, then they've got like foie gras, and they've got like wine and all the stuff, and they place settings all silver. He said, man, what private school is this? They're like, this is not a private school. I said, what? He said, all the schools are like this. They have like courses. He's like, yeah, and this is not like a special lunch. They know this is every meal. And he's just blown away. And so as he's sitting there talking to these kids, eating like, steak and chicken and all this, he FaceTimes a kid like in some random town in LA or anywhere in America. And it's like this horrible looking pizza, this juice box, same color, fruit cup, and he's like, would you want to eat this? And he's showing the kids, and it was in France. Would you eat this? It's American food, right? You like America. And the kid's like, no.
I've seen the article where they show the different school lunches throughout around the world, and it's just like embarrassing.
It's so bad.
I read an article this morning about how they are, for parents who have debt for their school lunches, that they're beginning to threaten to put those kids in foster care now because the parents can't pay their debt. Like that, so we're going through. Yeah, we're going back.
If you could see my face right now, you guys.
but that becomes the issue, and so I think one of the things that we're having a problem with on the debates, when I think Bernie Sanders does the best job of establishing healthcare, why, how much, et cetera, put it aside, because it's a human right. It shouldn't matter how much healthcare costs. That's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Healthcare should be provided.
Yeah.
Do we need to reinvent the system? Yes. Do we need to restructure it? Yes. Which his policies and other policies do begin to build around. And so they're all obviously, it's a very policy-based issue because you set that infrastructure up, but not only forward, but you have to go backwards. But I think that his core reason is because it's the right thing to do, goes to the same sense of you look at Guam or Puerto Rico and the terrible injustices that go on to those people who live there. And the only reason we don't talk about statehood or adjusting how their territories are governed is solely for the fact that a Republican-led Senate wouldn't want more Democratic representation in Congress and more electoral votes. That's literally all it is. I mean, because if Puerto Rico wouldn't get any more representatives and no senator and no electoral votes, it would make sense to make them a state. It would accrue their debt. And it would do all these different things that we took the responsibility of by taking over these places and stealing these places.
Stealing is more correct, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, the British Empire is not dead. The British Empire came to the 13 colonies, they transferred over, and they kept going.
Right, right. I think our priorities aren't in check. That's
not at all.
My feeling.
Personally and overall.
Yeah.
Because like when we talk about doing the right thing, it always goes back to the dollar. I mean, there's no way we're gonna look at something and just take the money, set it aside. Right. They're gonna want to know how much is it? Is it too much? Is it too little? Like, I think it was back to that documentary in Portugal. They were showing their prisons, and it looked like this.
Like, it was you showed me a picture. Didn't
oh my
you?
God!
And it looked like a dorm room.
It was like a dorm room. It was super nice, and like people don't stay here very long.
And I think they actually the term of correctional facility actually comes to play.
Yes,
there are course corrections that go on there. And there's
you're
personal
correcting your wrongdoings.
But that would cost a lot more than just building a 5x10 concrete cell.
Right, but that's a lot easier when you're throwing people in there for the color of their skin.
Exactly.
But also, our justice system is set up just to keep people in that system.
Yeah, because they're making money off us, and people understand that it's all money based. All our policies, all our agendas, all our legislature is all money based. So to hear someone say, "Well, it's the right thing to do. We should do this. It's a human right," they don't care.
Right.
They don't care. Like, it's so much about how much can I get from this because I'm gonna be out of here in 4 years, or my term is up, and I want to have this money when I get out of here. They don't care about me. They don't care about Dakota or Malynda. They want to make sure that I have what's for me. And I get that to a degree. I understand get yours and you get your family one. I understand. But to use our political system to do it is atrocious.
But what if you didn't have to get yours, right? Because if you think about, like, if the banking system just collapsed and money was no longer a thing, then what becomes an issue, right? Then shelter and food and resources, community. You know, the only reason that we're not at war with each other is because we've had enough death and war over the course of human history that we've realized we do better as a community. And even, like, you know, we forget sometimes that war is what has formed every country in this planet. War is what has built peace. War is what has built sovereignty. War has done all these things, and it hasn't ended. And I think we get lost in the boundaries of our country that, well, wars elsewhere are just these things, these bad things. They're all the same wars that we had, and that we all just keep cycling these wars. So the idea of that we're not all killing each other is because we've figured out a little bit of community. But that community comes with health, food, shelter. So you said it's the value of that dollar. The value of that dollar is so high because you have to buy necessities. You have to buy things that you should be afforded. So all of a sudden, the dollar is less important when, well, I got food, my family's okay, my kids are in school, they're going to go to university, and I could focus on doing my job that I love to do. I could focus on going home and having a hobby. A hobby is something that we all do when we have free time, which none of us do anymore because we have no free time. But like,
that's funny you say that. I don't mean to cut you off, but like again, I keep going back to this documentary. He was talking to someone about how they're so more focused on trades versus university, like because they have all those basic things taken care of.
Yeah.
And if a person likes to build ceramic bowls, everyone buys this guy's bowls, and that's enough to survive. Yeah. He makes good money. He's known as the best ceramic bowl maker. Right. He doesn't want to go work at Costco. I want to do this, and he loves it, and he gets paid to do it. Or this person is whatever their trade is, their hobby. They get paid to do that. Yeah. So their way of life is so different. I get to do what I love, and I get paid, and I have all the basic necessities. Who wouldn't want that here?
And that's a healthcare issue. That's mental health.
That's physical health, all that. Those stresses are gone. That's why we go over there and we're just like, man, the vibe here is different. Yeah.
And of course. And I think that's something that we don't understand that you talk about. I think Pete Buttigieg does bring it up a few times, the fact that he's still in student debt. Eric Swalwell, when he was running, did bring that up. And I think there's an out-of-touchness, which is a little bit different, that I think going through an experience of not having healthcare or understanding that, well, if I drive on the freeway or if I drive through the city, one of them is going to use less gas. Those are things that people think about. And there's this silly question about how hard do you pull the toilet paper roll? Well, if buying toilet paper once every, the big pack every few months, and you buy the big pack and you go, well, I'm out of toilet paper. Well, if I could get that last a little bit longer, I could save a few bucks here. And if I don't use as much paper towels, and then you're thinking about, I have this nice piece of steak. Well, I totally take this down, but if I have 3/4 of it, I'll have the other quarter tomorrow with my. And all of a sudden, those types of computations are happening for people and not for others. So I think our representatives need to at least understand, if not have experienced those things. In the same way, AOC was the perfect candidate for that community because she represented the community. Right. She represented their ideals. But the challenge is, what has that community gained since she's been elected? Not really anything much, because it's still a house of representatives that are very, very different than she is. And
For
it's
sure.
still law that needs to be passed. So this idea of this movement, unfortunately, we used to be at a place where if you, make the changes at home, suddenly it begins to grow. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we're at a point where the president has such a pivotal role in our society, as Barack Obama did, as Donald Trump has, that the next president could have such an integral role in changing that I think, which is why, unfortunately, this is the most important election of our country's history.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's always been my issue with politicians, is that they are helping fight for these causes that none of them have ever experienced. And it's so important to actually listen to the voices of the people, because we are supposed to be a democracy, but it never actually feels that way, as you talk about often. So I'm just wondering, like, how do they actually, because I mean, they go, to churches, they'll go out into the community, but they don't experience it. They don't really know what they're fighting for, to be honest.
You just said they go out to do something. There's no sense of empathy. Some of them do. There really is a sense of empathy and understanding that I've seen a lot of the media of these candidates putting out, that in terms of little documentary series or little clips of them going to certain cities. And you can see an investment or a listening that they're doing that is a lot different. Though there is, like you said, why do they go to Iowa? Well, because Iowa's first. Why do they go to the black communities in Iowa? Well, because they need that vote. Like, what if somebody just campaigned to campaign? What if somebody just campaigned to spread ideas? What if somebody campaigned without caring what someone would think about them? And they did in 2016. That's what Donald Trump did.
Right.
There wasn't much of a plan. He was screaming and shouting and pointing and standing behind, breathing down Hillary's neck in that debate. I mean, he was just doing things that were so out of left field, but they weren't about. I mean, one of his biggest faults is that there wasn't much of a plan there.
There wasn't a plan at all, and that's what as kooky as she is, I really do love Marianne Williamson, but she did say something very, very smart the last debate. She said he didn't run with any plans. He ran by simply saying, "Make America great again." And his whole voter base, they're like, yeah, I want to make this country great again, because they got into their mind that Obama ruined the country. So he didn't need a plan. He didn't.
And he did what he needed to do as the candidate he needed to be. He didn't. Iowa? Iowa. I would love to see Trump walk around Iowa.
Right.
Walk around there, go to the cookout. And I would love to see him in the community connecting with Iowans.
Of course not.
Of course not.
Never happened.
He shouted it in Des Moines. Yeah. And that's all he needed to do.
That's it. It's make it so simple and easy to consume, and people will eat it up.
Right. But I think that's what's important for these candidates now, to take that role, to go out and be them. Like Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren are two that I thought were, once they said they're going to run for president, suddenly they changed. They were no longer the senators that they were, or for Kamala Harris, the attorney general that they actually continued their voice. Elizabeth Warren's voice was strong. And then she ran for president, and it became conformed. And then a few months later, she got it back. Same thing with Kamala Harris. They did this thing of, and I understand, being a woman in this country, you have to play the role, or you think you have to play the role.
Same as a person of color.
Right. And for Kamala Harris, you get both.
Yeah.
And I think that they, unfortunately, were put under this machine of, well, now you have to run for president. No, be who you are and run for president, because that's when Kamala Harris, on that debate, she was Kamala Harris. She wasn't Kamala Harris. I mean, the video she put out was like a poppy, colorful, like, I'm Kamala for the people. And it was like, but that's not the person that I voted for you twice. As a senator and for attorney general, I voted for you twice, and I voted for somebody that I don't see anymore. And then suddenly she came back. So I think it's in the place where if they just be themselves and not care whether they win or lose, they'll most likely win, because the most of them are starting to worry about whether they're going to win or lose.
And that's honestly why Trump won, because he was just himself. As horrible and as bigoted and as racist as he is, he was just himself. He didn't have to try to appeal to the people. He just went out there, he's a businessman. He talked crap about everybody. People resonated with that, and he won. Which
is nice. The fringe Democratic candidates, Michael Bennett's a good one, and Jay Inslee's another good one, and Andrew Yang is he's on his own planet, and I love what he's doing. That's what I'm obsessed with him. I would be totally comfortable he was president of our country. Yeah. But these fringe Democratic candidates, there's like the Tim Ryans, I feel like they're just bodies that are being filled. But there's a few of them that are so dead set on what they want to run for that they're kind of blind to the fact that they are on the fringe. And it's refreshing to see them speak about certain issues as a politician, as somebody who cares, because they don't have the actual currency, money in their campaign to broaden out their visibility in the country. So they have to run on policy. Right. And so every now and again, I'll hear something from Jay Inslee, and I'll go, wait a second. why isn't this being echoed by everybody else? Well, because all he can do is be himself. Because if he's like everybody else, then he falls away. But if he's himself, he stands out.
And that's why Trump was actually, I mean, the perfect candidate, because he has the money and the ability to say whatever I want, and then back that up with putting it everywhere. Right. Or these guys who don't have, and I keep saying I hate how you have to have all this money to campaign, but you do, because you have to fight this monster. And then if you get the money from these donors and these sponsors, now you have to act a certain way. You can't be yourself, because now, well, this person representing me and this person giving me money, I got to do it. So I hate that whole template for a politician to have to fit into to run, because they can't be themselves. So and I agree. When I first heard Elizabeth Warren, I was like, okay, I can get with that, And then I'm like, where did it go?
Yeah, where did it go?
Yeah, what happened?
The Native American ancestry video, when she went and did the whole, like that, I think Trump's response to that was one of the better things he's done as president, in a sense of he did his whole Pocahontas thing which is terrible, and he for the longest time. And then she does this whole quest of herself, and she finds out she's like, what quarter? I don't know, 1/4% Cherokee or something like that. And they asked him about it. He was doing a press conference, I think, in the Rose Garden, and they asked him, and it was so dismissive of the whole. Like, she did this whole film and this whole journey, and he was like, yeah, whatever, and he kept going on, and it was so good to put, and both for his base, but also the sense of like, he said this thing. Let me go on this big journey to prove my captor right. Let me show you why I'm right. And by the time she finished proving her point, which wasn't really a good point, he was like, we don't really care anymore. Yeah, he moved on. And that's so defeating, and it's so accurate. And he, as a bully, knows that. Yeah. And I think that there's a bully mentality that he is good at that ends up really defeating Democrats in the election last time. I mean, he really hooked Hillary right at the end. Totally. And I think the Elizabeth Warren example is another one. But as it goes along, they have to make sure that they're not so reactive to what he says, because he doesn't care about what he said. He doesn't. So when you come back and you're passionate with tears in your eyes, and this is what you said to me, and here's why I'm not that, and he goes, you're wasting my time. I'm doing something else. Yeah. It's so deflating.
Yeah, they cannot play the game that way. They can't, because if they came up impassioned and bold and crying, he'd be like, look how weak they are. Look, this person's crying. Right. You want this as your president? And you're like, yeah, I mean, not even talking about what I'm saying, but I'm visibly upset, so now I'm weak. So you cannot play this game that way.
It's the same thing if you went on stage in North Carolina and we're going to say, well, here is the history of go back to Africa in our country, and here is the history of go back to your country. Here's what it means, and and you can give them a lecture in plain English that they would understand, and they would all go, send her back. Yeah. It wouldn't change. So we have to understand. We have to connect differently than just saying, oh, you're wrong, I'm right. Here's a really good answer of why I'm right, because by then that voter base,
they've already checked out. They've already checked. Yeah. So how do we fix that?
Personal activism. I think our activism now has to really focus on making sure that he's not elected again. I think it's the most important thing. Yeah. Like it's you're lost in the desert. The first thing you look for is water. You might need a phone to call somebody. You might need some shelter, but you just need some water. Yeah. And I think right now
we need water.
We active on ideas, on concepts, on do your personal thing and do your community thing, but do what you can to make sure he doesn't get elected. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. We have Karmel? 2 years to do it.
I think the next person who's gonna, whoever it is, again, like I said, don't play the game the same way. Be different. Like, he's using Twitter, and that's his big thing. I don't see a lot of candidates going hard on Facebook or Instagram. Like, a complete campaign that's completely different than we've ever seen before. It's the biggest platform we have. I get NBC, MSNBC, because we're used to seeing people on TV. Yeah. But if a candidate went hard on Instagram, stories, and Facebook, that's all we're looking at. Yeah. And then,
especially the stories, because the story, itself, the algorithm, that's another conversation. Yeah. But for stories, I'm with you on that.
If someone was on Twitter, if someone's on Facebook and Instagram with stories and all that, we'd be fascinated. Yeah. We get to see it behind the scenes and what they're doing. We would fall in love with that person just because we get access to them. Right. We get to see what they're actually doing. Right. That's what I think a person needs to do. Because one, Trump's not doing that. He don't want us to see behind the curtain. Right. No, absolutely not. Right. Yeah. It's easy for them to put on Twitter, put a tweet, and I'm good. Yeah. To do stories and all that stuff, it'd be a wrap. No.
It's a blessing and a curse that he is the president at the peak of technology.
Mm-hmm.
You know? But I do think if a candidate were to take a different platform and use it in a positive way, it could make a huge difference.
Well, he's the best of technology. He's the best of technology. He knows all about all good technology, and there's no one better than him about technology.
Everything.
So lucky us that at the peak of technology, we have the technology president.
Oh my gosh. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this conversation. Of course, in true We Need to Talk fashion, we always end with a positive note highlighting a community organization or person that's doing good in the world. But for this episode, I want you guys to tag somebody that is doing good in the world, some organization, some charity, some community that you think is doing positive so that we can highlight them on our next episode. And we want to thank you for listening. Thank you, Dakota, for coming in again. Always love having you. And we will see you next week.
Later.
Bye.
And this episode of We Need to Talk is brought to you by Black Brew, the darkest, richest, boldest coffee anywhere.